30 years to build the most beloved man in Hollywood, undone in less than 10 seconds. There is a rare kind of celebrity who doesn't just entertain the world. He convinces it that everything will be all right, that talent wins, that the smile is real, and that the man behind the cameras is exactly the one you see on screen. Well, Smith was that man. He was living proof that a broke kid from West Philadelphia could walk into any room on earth and make every person in it feel like they belonged. But what happens when the most likable man on the planet reveals live on the biggest night of his career, the version of himself he spent his entire life trying to bury? How does a boy who swore he would never become the violence he witnessed at home end up embodying it on the Oscar stage in front of the entire world? What was really happening inside a marriage that looked flawless from the outside? What did the entanglement expose that 30 years of fame couldn't hide? And why was the slap, in the end, the least of his problems? Before we answer any of that, we need to go back to the beginning, to a street in West Philadelphia, to a boy who learned that the smile was armor and never figure out how to take it off. Willard Carroll Smith Jr. was born on September 25, 1968, in West Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Not the Philadelphia of Liberty Bells and history books, but the one of cracked sidewalks, corner stores, and the heavy silence that settles when hope quietly gives way to survival. He was the second of 4 children born to Caroline Bright, a school administrator, whose discipline was as firm as her love was constant, and Willard Carroll Smith Sr., a refrigeration engineer who ran his household with military precision and little room for softness. On the surface, the Smiths were stable, church-going, and respectable, the kind of family the neighborhood held up as an example. Behind closed doors, the air was heavier. Willard Sr. was not cruel or absent. He was present, providing and demanding exactly what society told a father to be. But his presence carried a volatility that could shift without warning. Young Will witnessed episodes of domestic conflict in silence, scenes of tension between his parents that no child should carry. Yet every child in that situation does, tucking them deep into the chest, heavy and wordless long after the moment passes. Will has spoken about this carefully over the years, never with bitterness, always with complexity. He would later describe his father as his greatest teacher, and simultaneously the source of his deepest unresolved wound, a man he admired and feared in the same breath, a man whose approval he would chase for. Decades across stages, sound stages, and red carpets, never quite convinced he had earned it. The neighborhood was its own harsh education. Overbrook, West Philadelphia, in the late 1970s and early 1980s, taught quickly that perception was armor. If you seemed weak, you became a target. If you seemed afraid, the street found you. So the boy who would one day charm billions first learned to charm his own block, using humor, charisma, and irresistible energy as a shield against whatever the world might throw at him. His grandmother, Helen Bright, served as the moral compass of his childhood. A devout woman who kept a journal recording every prayer, every scripture, and every note of hope for her grandchildren. She looked at young Will already, the funniest boy in any room, and told him plainly, "Boy, you have a gift. Don't waste it." He never forgot those words. Long after the Grammys, Oscars, private jets, and Malibu estates, that voice still found him in the quiet moments. At Overbrook High School, Will was not the most disciplined student, but the most magnetic. Teachers remembered him not for timely homework, but for his ability to hold a room. He had a gift for language, not the structured kind in textbooks, but the rhythmic, alive language of storytelling. He heard music the way others heard conversation, naturally, instinctively, as if the beat was already inside him and the world was simply catching up. It was at Overbrook that he met Jeffrey Allentown's DJ Jazzy Jeff. There, friendship would alter both their lives. Jeff's technical skill perfectly complemented Will's raw performance instinct. Together, they weren't just good. They were electric, making everyone in the room feel alive. Their early performances in Philadelphia's local scene spread by word of mouth, the way genuine things always do. By 17, Will faced a crossroads. The Massachusetts Institute of Technology had shown interest. His mother pushed for university. The responsible path was clear. He chose the microphone instead. It was the first great gamble of his life. His parents, especially his mother, voiced their concerns. The music industry wasn't a plan, it was a dream. And dreams in West Philadelphia had a complicated relationship with reality. Yet Will possessed something strategy. Couldn't manufacture an almost irrational certainty that he was meant to be heard. DJ, Jazzy Jeff, and the Fresh Prince signed with Jive Records. Their early records were playful, clean, and defiantly fun. In an era when hip-hop grew darker and more aggressive, they weren't gangsta rap. They offered something rarer, purer. Joy. In 1988, that joy peaked. Parents Just Don't Understand won the first ever Grammy for Best Rap Performance. Overnight, Will Smith was no longer just a Philadelphia kid with a microphone. He was a name, a face, proof that it could be done. But Grammys don't pay rent. The money that came with early fame was staggering to a teenager from Overbrook. Like many before him, he spent it enthusiastically. Luxury cars, jewelry, and entourage, building a lifestyle on the illusion that the stream would never run dry. The IRS disagreed. By 1990, Will owed nearly $3 million in back taxes. The cars vanished. The entourage evaporated. The label lost patience. At 21, broke and terrified in a way fame had never prepared him for, he stared at the possibility that his bet had failed. In that moment of humiliation, a phone call changed everything. NBC executive Quincy Jones saw more than a rapper or Grammy winner. He saw a performer, a storyteller, a magnetic young man who could hold a room with presence alone. The offer was a sitcom, a fish-out-of-water comedy about a street-smart kid from West Philadelphia transplanted into a wealthy Bel-Air family. Will almost said, no, almost. The IRS helped him decide. He said yes and stepped from one world into another, from the corners of Overbrook to the sound stages of Burbank, from a boy fleeing debt to a man about to become one of the most recognizable faces on the planet. The escape from Philadelphia was complete, but Will could not outrun not with fame, fortune, or a smile that could melt crowds, were the seeds Philadelphia had planted. The hunger for approval, the compulsive need to perform, the terror of stillness. The boy who had watched tension fill his household and swore he would only bring laughter carried that oath into every room, every set, every relationship. He ran fast and brilliantly, with a grin so convincing that even he sometimes forgot what he was running from. The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air premiered on September 10th, 1990. America didn't just watch, it fell in love. The premise was simple, a street smart teen sent to live with rich relatives after trouble back home. But no writers' room could have scripted Will Smith himself, the way he moved through scenes. How a raised eyebrow could carry more comedy than pages of dialogue, or how he could drop the joke entirely and leave audiences in stunned silence with something raw and real. That moment came in season 4. Will's absent father, played by Ben Vereen, reappears, then abandons him again. Will holds it together, charming, deflecting, until the facade collapses in one devastating question to Uncle Phil. How come he don't want me, man? What followed wasn't conventional acting. It was excavation. Will reached into everything West Philadelphia had buried in him. The volatility of his father's house. The wordless weight a boy carries when the man he needs most keeps walking away, and brought it to the surface live in front of millions. James Avery, who played Uncle Phil, held him. The crew reportedly wept behind the Cameras. America tuned in for laughs, sat in silence watching a 24-year-old. From Overbrook bleed, real pain through fiction. Nobody who saw it forgot it. Will had revealed the depth beneath the grin. He wasn't just funny. He was devastating. The complete package who could make you laugh until you ached, then make you ache in an entirely different way before the commercial break. 6 seasons, 148 episodes. By the time The Fresh Prince ended in 1996, Will had outgrown it, not arrogantly but gratefully. He understood what the show had given him, a platform, a training ground, and millions who trusted him. Before he even asked, he stepped off the soundstage into one of the most extraordinary Hollywood careers ever. 6 Degrees of Separation, 1993, hinted at complexity beneath the comic timing, but 1995 announced him to the world in a language everyone understood. Box office success. Bad Boys, with Martin Lawrence. Then Independence Day, 1996, a film so ambitious and crowd-pleasing it became one of the highest grossing of its time. Wood didn't just star in it. He owned it, the gravitational center of the spectacle. Audiences worldwide surrendered. Men in Black, 1997, followed, along with its sequel, Enemy of the State, and Ollie, 2001. Perhaps his most demanding role. He gained muscle, master fighting, style, and inhabited a mythological figure that lesser actors had refused. The world, including Muhammad Ali himself, accepted it. The performance earned his first Oscar nomination. But 2006 gave audiences the scene many still see as the truest distillation of Will Smith as a performer. The Pursuit of Happiness, based on Chris Gardner's true story, asked him to be small, broken, and vulnerable. He did alongside his real son Jaden. The bathroom scene, father and son huddled in the dark, while Will whispers that everything will be okay, unsure if he believes it, stopped America cold. No explosions, no spectacle, just raw humanity. The audience sensed truth beneath the craft, a father's terror of failing his child, a man's desperate need to be enough. Emotions Will didn't have to reach far to find. A second Oscar nomination followed, along with widespread recognition that he wasn't just a movie star who could act. He was a first-order actor who happened to be the most likable man alive. By the late 2000s, his production company Overbrook Entertainment was a major Hollywood force. His per-film fee hit $20 million. His global box office surpassed $5 billion. He stood alongside Denzel Washington, Tom Hanks, and Tom Cruise as one of the few names that could open a film anywhere on Earth. Yet, at the summit of professional triumph, something was quietly fracturing. The marriage to Jada Pinkett Smith, whom he wed in 1997, was far more complicated than the coordinated red carpet appearances suggested. The family, Will Jada, Trey, from his first marriage to Sherry Zampino, Jaden, and Willow, was held up as a model of black excellence and modern partnership. But behind the image was a man who had never stopped running. He had learned in childhood that stillness was dangerous and performance was survival. The only way to keep those he loved close was to keep them dazzled. He performed for his family with the same furious energy he brought to the world. Performances, no matter how brilliant, eventually exhaust the performer. The cracks were invisible outside. Inside, both Will and Jada knew the foundation had been shifting for years, quietly, with the dignity of two intelligent people who still loved each other, but grew uncertain about what they were to one another. Jada wasn't someone Will discovered at the height of fame. She knew him before it all. They met when she auditioned for The Fresh Prince, she was told. She was too short for the role. She didn't get the part, but she captured Will's attention, and once it landed, it wasn't easily redirected. Their courtship wasn't simple. Will was still married to Sherry, with whom he had Trey in 1992. That marriage ended in 1995. 2 years later, on December 31st, 1997, New Year's Eve, Will and Jada married, as if the calendar itself marked a significant beginning. 4 years, it genuinely worked. Jada was formidable in her own right. Actress, musician, producer, a woman of fierce intelligence and directness that sometimes matched or exceeded Will's. She was the one person who didn't perform. For him, who saw the relentless optimism and compulsive need to be loved not as superstar qualities, but as the traits of a man. That honesty was what he needed and eventually what terrified him. Their early years had the texture of real partnership. Jaden was born in 1998, Willow in 2000. The family was ambitious, creative, and devoted, parenting with intentionality that drew both admiration and criticism. They were unconventional and outspoken, but beneath the public harmony, a private reckoning unfolded. Will has spoken in his memoir and interviews about his interior complexity. The compulsive drive that carried him to stardom had a darker side, an inability to be still, anxiety when achievement plateaued, restlessness no box office success could quiet. By his own admission, he was addicted to external validation, making genuine intimacy difficult. Intimacy requires stillness, sitting in a room, without performing, being seen without the smile working overtime. Will had never learned how. The child who used charm as armor had become a man for whom the armor was indistinguishable from his skin. Jada saw it and named it. As Will's career consumed more oxygen, the distance between them grew, not with hostility, but with the quiet sadness of two people who love each other yet can't quite reach across the space ambition had carved. By the early 2010s, and more clearly from 2016 onward, both acknowledged a period of deep separation, emotionally real, though not always legally formalized. They were, as Jada later framed it, two people needing to discover who they were separately before understanding what they were together. Then came 2020. The world was already cracked open by the pandemic. In August on her Facebook Watch series Red Table Talk, Jada confirmed a romantic relationship with singer August Alsina, nearly 20 years her junior. She described it as growing from friendship during a conscious separation, with Will's blessing, and said it had run its course. She called it an entanglement. The internet didn't absorb nuance. The clinical, detached word became instant. Cultural shorthand, memes, parodies, think pieces. Public scrutiny dismantled the couple's carefully managed image in real time. For Will, the humiliation was devastating. He had built his identity around having it all together: career, aspirational family, the man who made joy seem possible. Now, in 1 hour of daytime television, the scaffolding was exposed. He sat at the table, answered questions, and maintained composure with 30 years of discipline. But those close to him described the aftermath as among the darkest periods of his life, not because of surprise or deception, but because the public exposure stripped him of control over his own narrative. August Alsina's later interviews complicated the framing, suggesting the relationship was more significant and less mutually authorized than presented. Conflicting accounts left no clean resolution, only the image of Will trying to hold a unraveling marriage together while the world diagnosed it live. He later described the Red Table Talk as one of the worst days of his life. Not conventional betrayal, but the cost of agreeing to an open framework he didn't fully understand emotionally while still carrying traditional expectations of marriage. He had tried to be evolved and generous, and it cost him a private sense of himself as a man, husband, and protector. The entanglement didn't end the marriage. Will and Jada remained together in their complicated, unconventional way, but it ended the untouchable version of Will Smith the public had accepted for 30 years. What remained was something more fragile, human, and volatile than anyone, including Will, had anticipated. The Oscar season approached, and with it a night that would make the entanglement feel like mere rehearsal for catastrophe. The night of March 27th, 2022 began as a coronation. Will arrived at the 94th Academy Awards carrying a lifetime of work. His performance in King Richard as a relentlessly driven father who coached Venus and Serena Williams from Compton's cracked courts to tennis greatness was widely seen as the finest of his career. Not the blockbuster Will, but the still patient internally complex one. Every major precursor, Golden Globe, SAG, BAFTA, pointed the same way. After 2 prior nominations and 3 decades of work, the Academy was set to hand him the definitive verdict on a film life. Jada sat beside him, radiant. They looked like a reconciled power couple who had weathered public difficulty. The image was powerful, and as the night revealed, extraordinarily fragile. Comedian Chris Rock took the stage and made a brief joke about Jada's shaved head, comparing her to G.I. Jane. It was casual throwaway humor. What Rock may not have fully known was that Jada's shaved head stemmed from alopecia, a condition she had spoken about publicly. It carried weight that an awards show wasn't the place to probe through comedy. Will laughed at first, an involuntary reflex. Then he looked at Jada. Whatever he saw in her expression, tightening, stillness, a quiet, dignified wound, something shifted. He stood, walked on stage, and slapped Chris Rock across the face. The room fell into a disbelieving silence. Rock held his ground, or returned to his seat and shouted twice from the audience, "Keep my wife's name out your fucking mouth." The broadcast continued, but the world did not. Within minutes, the slap was everywhere. Clips were dissected. Opinions formed before the night ended. Less than an hour later, Will won Best Actor for King Richard. He walked on stage weeping, invoked God, called himself a vessel of love, and compared himself to Richard Williams, a man protecting his family in a hostile world. Under other circumstances, it might have been moving. In context, it felt dissociated, tone-deaf to some, heartbreaking or bewildering to others. The Academy did nothing in the moment. Will wasn't removed. The image that burned into cultural memory wasn't just the slap. It was the smile afterward, the Oscar raised high, and the standing ovation from a room uncertain what it was applauding. The reckoning came swiftly. The Academy launched disciplinary proceedings. Colleagues issued condemnations. Chris Rock later addressed it with controlled anger more devastating than charges would have been. Will resigned before expulsion. The Academy banned him from all Academy events for 10 years. Projects quietly disappeared or were delayed. Friends stepped back without statements, simply becoming unavailable. Invitations stopped. The man who had spent his adult life in rooms full of people wanting to be near him suddenly found himself alone. That he fled to India and various retreats, places where cameras couldn't easily follow. The silence he had always feared became his only company. He later called this the most painful period of his life, not physically, but existentially, forced to sit with himself without performance, smile, or audience. For the first time, he had nowhere to run from. That stillness emerged something tangled but honest. His memoir, Will, published in late 2021 before the slap, was suddenly read in a new light. It was remarkably candid about childhood wounds, compulsions, his marriage, and terror of failure, the most vulnerable he had ever been publicly. Yet, the slap suggested that vulnerability on the page and transformation in the body are not the same. A man can articulate his wounds precisely and still be undone by them in one unguarded second. The boy from Overbrook who swore never to become the violence he witnessed had, in front of the world, done exactly that. Not in degree, but in the simple fact that anger had moved through his body into another person's face. He issued public apologies, measured and genuine, yet insufficient. Some fractures can't be repaired with words alone. Chris Rock accepted on his own timeline, making clear he wasn't ready for the conversation Will needed more urgently. The exile stretched. Months became years. In the silence, public opinion began to fracture. Some found the punishment disproportionate. Others pointed to decades of work, genuine artistry, and the humanity in the memoir, arguing one indefensible second shouldn't erase everything before it. Stripped of distractions, Will was left with the only question that ever truly mattered. Who was he when no audience remained to perform for? The answer wouldn't come from a stage or red carpet. It would come from quiet, discomfort, and the unglamorous work of facing what he had done without armor. The road back didn't begin with a press tour or engineered reemergence. It began in silence, the slow process of dismantling an identity built since childhood, and asking, with humility, whether anything real lay underneath. He sought therapy with a new honesty. Performances that serve him elsewhere were useless here. A therapist doesn't applaud the smile. They sit with you in silence and wait. For a man who had filled silence with charm and motion for 50 years, simply sitting in it was excruciating labor. What surfaced wasn't surprising to careful readers of his memoir. The childhood wounds, the volatility in his father's house, the oath never to become what he feared, the hunger for approval that drove every decision from near bankruptcy to the Oscar stage. They had never been healed, only managed, buried under achievement, silenced by applause. When the applause stopped and the empire's distractions were removed, the wounds remained exactly where he had left them, untouched, patient, waiting. His father had died in 2016. In the final years, as Alzheimer's took the once immovable man, Will became his caretaker, bathing him, dressing him, sitting through the disease's confusions. In doing so, he came to see his father not as a mythological figure, but as a flawed, wounded man who did what he could with what he had been given. That understanding became the foundation of whatever healing was possible. Will was not his father's violence. He was not the slap. He was not the worst moment of his worst night. But he wouldn't be free of any of it until he faced it directly, without the protective distance of performance. Jada remained. Their marriage continued to defy simple public narratives, not a fairy tale reconciliation, but an honest, complicated, continuously renegotiated reality, too layered for tabloid verdicts. Jada has spoken of it, requiring constant, often painful honesty rather than the performance of perfection. Will has slowly learned to offer that honesty instead of the version he thinks the room needs. Their children have built lives of substance. Trey has navigated being the child from the first marriage with quiet dignity. Jaden has grown into a musician and entrepreneur with his own voice. Willow has become the most artistically radical of the family, inheriting her parents' best qualities. Will now speaks of his children with a different tenderness, less about achievements, more about who they are. The shift is small but significant, from measuring legacy in box office and statues to understanding that the most enduring thing he will leave is the quality of the human beings carrying his name. The professional exile softened over time. Emancipation, filmed before the Oscars and released in late 2022, was received with ambivalence. The context too loud for the strong performance to be judged cleanly. It was perhaps the cruelest consequence of the slap, the way it contaminated the air around every piece of work. Yet, the industry didn't close its doors permanently. Bad Boys, Ride or Die, arrived in 2024 and performed strongly at the global box office, crossing $400 million worldwide. Not a full vindication, but a quiet signal that audiences, in the privacy of darkened theaters, were still willing to spend time with Will Smith. The relationship between a star and the public who grew up with him proved more resilient and complicated than social media outrage suggested. His fortune remains vast. Estimates place his net worth at approximately $350 million in 2026. The estate's production company and investments stand largely intact. Financial and moral consequences do not always arrive in equal measure. But at 57, Will speaks of the money with detachment. It insulates but does not heal. A $350 million fortune cannot purchase the one thing he spent his life performing to receive, the simple, unconditional sense of being enough. He has called the slap the most expensive lesson of his life, not financially, but in the trust it cost him from the public, colleagues, and even his own children, who had to see their father at his worst broadcast worldwide. Rebuilding that trust is not a project with an end date. It is a daily practice, showing up each morning with more honesty and less performance than the day before. Perhaps that is the truest measure of where Will Smith stands today, not in box office returns or industry rehabilitation, but in the quieter evidence of a man genuinely changed by what he endured. The boy from Overbrook who swore he would never become the violence he witnessed has spent years reckoning with the night he did. The performer who built an empire on the belief that joy was possible for anyone willing to work for it has discovered that real joy, not the performed version, requires a stillness. He is only now learning. The smile is still there, but behind it, finally, is something cameras could never manufacture. A man who has stopped running, not because the road ended, but because he has painfully understood what he was running from. That understanding, however late, is the only foundation on which anything real can be built. Will Smith's story is not a simple cautionary tale, redemption arc, villain's fall, or hero's triumph. It is more uncomfortable than any of those. It is a mirror held up to every person who has ever built an identity around performance, rather than who they truly are, who has run so fast toward the next achievement that they never asked if the running itself was the wound, who has loved someone yet somehow left them feeling unseen, or who has quietly known the gap between their public self and their 3 a.m. self is wider than they admit. Will Smith is not unique in his fractures. He is unique only in that his fractures happen in front of everyone. The question his story leaves is not what you think of him. It is what his story reveals about you, about the armor you wear, the performance you maintain, the thing you are running from, and the morning it will finally catch you. He stood on the biggest stage in the world at the moment of his greatest triumph and showed us his most broken self, unintentionally, irrevocably. In doing so, he gave us something no blockbuster ever could: the truth.